Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on the time zone you are living in. Welcome to this webinar about formula-driven automation in Baserow. So the webinar will focus on the use of formulas within Baserow. Let's see what we are going to cover today. So first of all, we will spend a couple of minutes talking about what formulas exactly are and how you can use them in Baserow. And after that short introduction, I will demonstrate 10 use cases where you can use formulas to automate or to streamline your processes. And afterwards, we can have a Q&A, but you can also put questions in the chat during the webinar. I will try to pause from time to time and see if I can answer a couple of questions between the use cases. So, first of all, thank you for attending, everyone, and let's get started. So, first of all, what are formulas? Well, this is a definition I picked from the user documentation in Baserow. So, a formula field is just a field, like you have a text field, number field, date field, but the main difference is that it calculates a value instead of holding a value. So, for example, in a date field or the text field, you can enter a date or a number of text. You cannot enter something in the formula field. The formula field will calculate the value and will show this value. And it will do this in the same way for every record in your table. And yeah, they are similar to the ones that you have in a spreadsheet. So in spreadsheets, you also have formulas to calculate the sum of certain numbers, sometimes also to count the number of items. So they are very similar to those ones, and they are pretty fast. Also, there is the word functions highlighted because a formula is actually a construction of functions. And Baserow has a number of functions. So on the screenshot, you see the formula dialog that you see when you create a formula field. And there you can see all the functions that are supported with Baserow. So let's go to the demo database. Let me create a new database, call this demo. And let's create a formula field. So I'm going to put the type to formula demo. And when I click in this field, well, I see all the functions that are supported with Baserow, and I can start constructing my formula. And one of those functions is the contains function. So let's use this one as an example. If I enter a function, I immediately see some documentation about the function. So what does the contains function do? Well, it returns true if the first piece of text contains at least the second piece once. So you have, for example, test, it checks for the character E. So I can also do this. This is a demo, and I want to check if the word demo is present. Yes, it is, and it checks it for every record. So if I start adding records, it will check it for each record in my table. So this is how a function is constructed. So I use just the name of my function, and I can have one or more arguments. So for example, I had two arguments with my contains function. So the first one was a piece of text, and the second one was the word I was looking for. Next is how powerful functions are. This is because they can be nested into each other. So the inner function serves as the argument of the outer function. And let's look at this again. So in my name field, I'm going to enter a bit of text. This is a demo. This is not demo, DMO, not DMO. Okay, let's see, in my formula dialog here. So instead of using the hard-coded word, this is demo, I will replace it with my name field. And now I have a function field with the argument name, being the name of my field, that is wrapped inside my contains function. So now I made it a little bit more dynamic, and everywhere I have demo, it shows a checkbox, otherwise it doesn't. So not demo, if I say not demo, it will put the checkbox, otherwise it doesn't. So this is a very brief description of what functions are and how they work in Baserow. I see a question in the chat, resizing the window in Livestorm. The function, is it readable or just too small? I was thinking if I resize my window, or maybe if I zoom in a little bit, yeah, that should do the trick. Yeah, so yeah, this should increase the readability. Okay, so this was a short introduction. Let's have a check at the 10 use cases. And before we get started, maybe, yesterday we released the Baserow version 1.32, and one of the templates in this version are the demos that I will be using here for this webinar. So if you have a look at baserow.io/templates, there is a formulas template, and this will contain the 10 databases that I will be using for these use cases. So after a webinar, you can, and actually, as long as the template is available, which will be forever, I guess, you can use it. You can install it to have a look at the examples. Okay, let's get started with the first one. So, first use case, I want to create a unique, meaningful name or a meaningful code or ID for each record. So the problem here is that I want to ensure that each record has a unique ID, can be identified uniquely in my table, but yeah, I don't want to just use the auto number for it. So my solution here, I'm going to combine the row ID function with other parts of my table to construct a unique name. And those are the functions I'll be using. So let's go to the demo. So I have a table task, and the first function I'll be using is my row ID function. And row ID is a function that returns a unique ID of my record. So I have ID 1 to 10. If I create a new record, it will show ID 11. If I delete this record and I create another one, it has ID number 12. So the ID will always be unique. But the ID doesn't tell me very much about the record itself. So I want to construct something that is meaningful and unique. So in my second step, this is where I start nesting functions. I use the concat function, and the concat function will concatenate multiple pieces of text. And I want to concatenate what is in my field title, followed by a dash, followed by the row ID. And this is the result. I have what's in my title field, followed by a dash and the row ID. But, okay, not that it's meaningful, but maybe not that super readable. So let's take it one step further, and I want to involve my category. So what I'm doing in my next step, I'm going to use more functions. I have my field category, which is a single select field. I'm going to convert it to a text. because a single select field has both a value and a color. So I convert it to a text to use it as like it was a single text field. I'm going to convert it to uppercase. So we have a function upper and lower to convert a text to uppercase and lowercase. And I only gonna take the 3 most left characters. So 3 most left characters to uppercase for my category, and I concatenate this with dash and my ID. Okay, this offers me the following result, but I want to take it one more step further, and I also gonna concatenate the year that my record was created. So I have a created on field, and I'm using the year function to isolate the year from the rest of the date. You can also concatenate the year by, for example, attach to it the month for my field created on. I made a typo somewhere. Yeah, I forgot the comma to concatenate the next part. Or maybe one of the parentheses is not opened or closed correctly. Let's have a look here. So field created on, yeah. I have to close it here. So yeah, now I added the year and I also added the month directly to it. Yeah. Okay, so first use case, using text functions to create a unique ID. Let's take this use case one step further. And I want to add leading zeros so that my readability is much better, because now 1, 2 doesn't say that much. And also, not only to improve the readability, I also want to improve my sorting, because if I concatenate it with something and I sort on text, well, I will have 1, 10, 11, then 2, 3, and so on. So I want it to have leading zeros. Row ID and concat, we already discussed those functions. A new one is if to build a condition. So going to case 2, my tasks, and I'm using the if condition here. So if my row ID is lower than 10. So if always starts with a condition. If this condition is true, what needs to happen? Well, I'm going to concatenate 4 leading zeros with my row ID, resulting in 5 characters for my ID. Otherwise, if this condition is not true, else, well, I'm going to test a new condition. I'm going to test, is it lower than 100? If that's true, I'm going to add 3 leading zeros followed by my ID. If not, 2 leading zeros. If not, 1 leading zero. If not, well, I don't need to add any leading zeros. And the result of this is that I always have an ID that has exactly 5 characters. So if I create a new one here, it has 3 zeros, 11. A new one, 3 zeros, 12. And it will go on until I have 99,999 items. Well, in that case, from record 100,000, I need to do an additional check to have 6 digits. So, yep, that's use case number 2, adding some leading zeros in front of it. No, we don't have a function for leading zeros. So what you can do if you have a number field, or you have something that returns a number. So let's create a formula here, row ID. If your formula returns a number, you can have a prefix or suffix, but you can also set formatting, but we don't support adding leading zeros by default yet. So that's why I demonstrated how you can do it with a formula. Okay, also see a question about webhooks. Webhooks are covered later during this webinar, so I'll come back to that question later. Let's have a look at use case number 3, where I'll focus on task scheduling. So I still have a table with tasks, and I want to build a schedule. And I'm going to use the following for my scheduling. I have a field importance and I have a urgency. And I want to set a desired start date based on those two criteria. So if it's important and urgent, I want to schedule a task for today. If it's urgent but not that important, I'm going to schedule it for tomorrow. If it's not important and not urgent, well, good managers know that you have to consider doing it or not. So I'm not going to schedule it yet. And if it's important but it's not urgent, I'm going to schedule it within 3 days. So that's a business logic I made up for myself. Feel free to adjust it for your own processes, for your own businesses. So yeah, I'm going to use the add and date interval function. All the other functions we have already used. Let's have a look at this case. So I have my table tasks, I have a certain deadline, and I have a function that determines is it urgent. So what is this function? Well, if my deadline is before today plus 3 days, well, then it's urgent. So actually what this function is saying is my deadline within 3 days. If it's more than today plus 3, and this is what the date interval function does, it adds a number of days or a number of hours, years, months, whatever you need to specify here to a date. So if this statement, which is actually a condition I'm putting here, if this returns true, I get a check mark. Is it a high priority? Well, then I check my importance field. If the importance field equals high, then it's a high priority. In all other cases, it's not a high priority. And then I have my desired start date, where I will use the results of those two functions in a new one. And I'm using the AND condition here. So follow with me here. And if my field urgent is true and high priority is true, well, then I want to schedule it today. Otherwise, urgent is true, but not field high priority is true. Well, schedule it for today plus 1 additional day. If it's not urgent, but it's high priority, schedule it today plus 3 days, and otherwise don't schedule it. Yeah. So this is already a lot of text here that might not be that very readable. So this is why I create the field is urgent and is high priority. If I had to replace the field is urgent with this function, then it would make my formula even longer and even less readable. So it's always a good idea to split up formulas into multiple small pieces of text. A question, today remains today every day? Yes. So if you install the template, you see that the deadline will have a different day. So the desired start date will have a different day. And if I run this tomorrow, yeah, I will have a different outcome. So if I have a formula field here, and that's what I will demonstrate with automations and a webhook, this is always a dynamic field. So tomorrow it will be the 21st of March. Tomorrow plus 1, well, the answer will be 22 over here, and this will be 21. So using today is indeed always dynamic, and it updates every day. Okay, for the next one. So I have my task scheduling. We come back to that in a later use case. But I also want to enforce a valid data input. And that's a feature that is requested a couple of times. But because the grid view is like a spreadsheet, and you have the choice to say, okay, I'm going to work by row, I'm going to work by column. It's hard to enforce required fields because sometimes you want to fill in records column by column. Sometimes you want to do them row by row. So setting or putting fields mandatory in the UI is pretty hard thing. Wouldn't be that user friendly, but you can implement your own validation. Let's have a look at case number 4. So the validation I want to enforce here is that I want to make sure that the number of fields are required. And if I work with a contractor, I want to ensure that the contractor has a valid VAT number in the database. And yeah, those are the functions I will be using. The isBlank checks if the field has a value, and the regex replace will check for certain patterns. I'm going to use this for the VAT number. Okay, so I have my tasks over here, and as you can see, I have removed a bit of information. So in this record, I removed the deadline, I removed the importance, and for this one, I removed the expected workload. 3 things that I said that were required for all my records. So to enforce validation, are all my required fields valid? Well, I'm going to check with the AND. That always takes 2 parameters, so I have an AND inside an AND here. If my importance is not blank and my deadline is not blank, this is the first AND condition. So if this returns true, do the second AND condition where I check the expected workload. So if importance is not blank, deadline is not blank, and expected workload is not blank, well, it puts on the check mark, it returns true. Otherwise, those 3 where I remove the piece of data, it doesn't check this one. The second requirement is if I work with a contractor, so I have my field contractor here, it goes to the to the second table, contractors, and each contractor has a VAT number. And I added a formula here that checks if my VAT number is valid. And I do this based on a regular expression. So what is my regular expression here? Well, my text needs to start with GB. That's it. So I use Great Britain as an example for VAT numbers. Feel free to replace it with whatever you want. So it has to start with G followed by B. That's mandatory. Followed by a number between 0 and 9, and there must be exactly 9 digits. So if that's true, well, it returns an empty string. And otherwise, it returns a text that does not match. So as you can see here for Swift Logistics, I have added a 1 to the end, so it has 10 digits. So it shows the additional 1. If I replace it with A, it will show an A. If it's 9 digits, but the last one is a character, well, it will show the entire text. So everything that doesn't match my pattern will be shown over here. So I know if this is empty, then it matches my pattern. So if I add a 4 here, I get an empty field because, yeah, it perfectly matches. If I add something in front of here, well, it shows the A because it doesn't match my pattern. And I implemented this over here. So first of all, I check, is there a contractor? So I use the count function on the contractor field to see, is there a contractor? Because if no contractor is filled in, it's useless to do any further checks. Second, well, this is a nice construction here. I use the lookup function on my contractor table on the VAT number field. And since a lookup field is always a list of fields, I want to convert it to a text. And I'm going to do this by converting the list to a text using the join function. So that's a construction that's useful in a lot of cases. So I look up the VAT number and I join it, and all the values are joined by an empty character, which means I just put them after each other. I'm going to check the regular expression here. Yeah, if it matches, shows the word valid, then I check if it's equal to the word valid, and we're good to go. So everywhere where the contractor is valid, well, it shows the check mark. And it's only Swift Logistics over here that is not valid. So it doesn't check the box here. And yet to check if my final task is valid, well, if required fields is valid and contractor is valid, then the entire thing is valid. Okay, maybe a small thing for the lookup and join functions. So what I can do here is adding a lookup field on my contractor table. And I want to see the VAT number, for example. So what if I have multiple contractors here? I'm going to select a couple. Yeah, then I also have multiple values here. This is nice, but sometimes you want the multiple values just be text so that you can do other operations on it. Well, formula fields to the rescue. I'm going to call this contractor text. It's going to be a formula field. So I can also do a lookup field. Sorry, the field name is VAT number in the exact same way that I do a lookup field by field type. But the nice thing is I can use the join function and I can, for example, say separate them all with a dash. Yeah. And now I have a pure text field here instead of a lookup field. So it's a small trick that can be handy in a lot of scenarios. Okay, let's have a look at the questions. Yeah, for the form view, so if I create a form, the only validation you can do here is saying, okay, it's required or not required. So we don't have support yet to say, okay, it has to be a number. It has to be a number between this one and this one. But what you can do if a second field is shown, you can say, okay, there is a condition to show the next field. For example, my description, which is the previous field, contains this word or doesn't contain a certain word or has a certain length or it should not be empty and so on and so on. So you can enforce some validation by showing only the next field when the previous fields are valid. Yeah, for the VAT number, yeah, I just checked Stack Overflow for a regular expression, so my apologies. I didn't completely check it if it was valid. It was more like a demo to show how you can check a pattern. Okay. Over to the next one, halfway there with use case number 5 to schedule, to build a planning and schedule deadlines. So I have a number of tasks. My tasks have a deadline and I want to see what is the latest start date for a task depending on the deadline and the expected workload. I'm going to solve it by calculating backwards from the deadline and adding 1 day of buffer. And actually, all the functions that will be used here are already used in previous scenarios. So if I check use case number 5, I have my deadline, I have my expected workload, and I have my final start date over here. And I added a yellow color for the final start dates that are in the past. So if they are before today, show a yellow color because these tasks actually should have been started already. So what is the formula looks like? Well, I picked my date interval function and I already showed that date interval. Yeah, you can say, okay, at 1 year, at 3 days, at 5 days, but you can replace the hard-coded part also by a formula. And that's really the power of formulas. You can nest them endless into each other. So I have my date interval and I say, okay, concatenate the following. Bit my expected workload divided by 6. And why by 6? Well, my assumption is that on a certain task you can work 6 hours a day, and the remaining time of the day is seen as overhead or overload on answering emails and so on. Plus, I'm going to add 1 buffer day. I concatenate the result of this calculation with the word days, and then it's just like I would, for example, hard code it, say here, add 4 days. But instead of that, I do it with a calculation. Yeah, and this calculates the final start date. So if my deadline is the 21st of March, I have 12 work hours. 12 divided by 6 is 2. I add 1 day is 3. So it calculates back to the 18th of March as my start date. And then in this way, I can see when a task should have been started. Okay, it brings us to use case number 6, where I want to trigger a webhook or trigger an automation to update the status. So let's pick use case number 6 over here. I have my task table and I have a button here, start task. And let's zoom out a little bit. A little bit more. If I click this button, it should trigger an N8N automation and it should fill in the date of today as the start date. And actual start date here is a date field, so it's not a formula field, which means if I check my data tomorrow, it will still be the same date. It will not update like in a formula field. So let's say, yeah, this one should already have started. So let's click started. And as you can see, the date of today is now filled in. So let's also start this one and the date is filled in. So what happened in the background? Well, let's have a look at what's behind the button. So button is also a function in Baserow, and I'm going to concatenate a webhook coming from a local N8N instance. I'm going to concatenate this with the ID of my row. Yeah, and I'm going to show the text start task. Only if my task is valid. If my task is not valid, I will show a button with task not valid. And this is what is shown here because I don't have a deadline. If you don't have a deadline, you can't start a task in my business logic. So what happened, it triggered the following webhook. So yeah, this is the webhook I was talking about. No, not this one. This is from my local instance. Yeah, it's this one that had been triggered. And what happens? Let's have a look at the execution. So it just executed. It got a certain ID. It passes this ID to my Baserow node, where I want to update a record with the given ID, and I'm going to set the date to the day of today. Yeah, and in this way it updates my table. So where a webhook is mostly a post request that you trigger when a record is updated, a record is deleted, created, and so on. So I can do here in Baserow, you can add a webhook to a certain operation. Well, you can also refer to GET request of a webhook and put it behind a button to start an automation when clicking the button. Another example of having a button here is showing the details in an application builder page. So I also create a small application, just one page showing the task details. And I have a data source here that gives the details of a single task. I publish this page, and I put it the URL over here. So concatenate my URL again with the row ID and show the text details. So if I click this button, it loads all the details for my first task. If I click this button, it shows the details for the next task. Okay, so yeah, starting an automation based on a GET request from a button within my table. Okay, next one is focusing a little bit on files. So files also have some functions. So the use case here is I have a table with assets. Assets can be documents, it can be images, but I want to show it in my application builder, and I want to show the images in an image element, and I want to show the documents as a hyperlink that I can click on. And there are multiple functions that can be used on a file field. So for example, the get file visible name shows the original file name. The index is a function that allows you to select one file from the file field, because the file field is always a list of files. Even if you only have one file, it is index 0 in your list. And there's also the function is image that returns true if a file is an image file, false if it's a document or any other file type. Okay, so let's have a look. My application over here, I have tasks, I still have contractors, but I also have an asset repository. And I have a number of files here. This is my file field with the name file. I can add one or more files to it. It's related to a certain task. And here is my isImage detection. So isImage, select my file field, and all the functions that belong to images, so for example also the isImage, it requires the index of a file, because you cannot check if a series of files is an image. So index 0, the first one, check if it's an image. And indeed for the images it returns true, otherwise false. And the same way I'm using the get visible name also for the first file in the list. Well, check the visible name, and I got a readable name for my file. And why is this useful? Well, if I have a look at my application here, I split it, my assets into two columns. I have images and I have documents. And let me just click from here. Okay, what happens is all the image files are rendered as an image element, while all my documents are rendered as hyperlinks that I can click on to open them in a new tab. Yeah. Okay, so in my application builder itself, what I have here is a repeat element, and the data source are my image assets. Yeah. So I have three data sources. I get my task. I have all the image assets from my asset repository, and I have all the other assets from my asset repository. So this determines if I have to render them as an image or just as a hyperlink. Yeah, can be very useful to make that distinction. Okay, next use case is going to the form view. Classic question for webinars. Will there be a recording? Yes, you will be mailed the recording after the webinar. So I think 15-20 minutes after the end of the webinar, the recording will become available. Okay, so use case number 8. This is making forms a little bit dynamic. Or maybe just a question first. Can a formula field be utilized to concatenate multiple fields into a clickable URL link? Yes, that's the use case I'm going to demonstrate here. So I continue to work on the asset library. I have a form to add new assets, but I want the task to already be filled in. So let's have a look at it. Case number 8. So I have my asset repository. I have add new asset. It requires a task and you can upload a file. So the form is shared. Let me open the form over here. So I need to select the task. Then I can select a file. And after I selected the file, I can submit it. Okay. The thing is, I want to do this from my task table. I want to press an asset button here and I want to automatically link it to the task. And I don't want the user to be able to edit it. So if I want to add an other asset here, I click Add Asset. And it's the same form, but the task field had disappeared. But still, it's filled in. And you can see this. I don't know if I can zoom in enough here. No. You can see it in the URL a little bit. I have a query string that pre-fills my task with the primary field of the task. And the second part of the query string says, okay, hide my task field. So if I remove this part, I make my task field visible and the task is already pre-filled. Yeah. If I remove this entirely, well then, yeah, I actually remove the pre-fill. So in Baserow, you have pre-fill underscore name of the field equals a certain value, and you can fill in a linked field, a text field, you can pre-select the date, and so on. And with the hide underscore name of the field, you can hide the field. So to answer the question, can I use a formula to construct a clickable URL? Yeah, I haven't used a clickable URL here. I did it with a button because I think buttons are cool to use. It shows the user immediately that you can push on them. But let's remove the button part or let's replace button with link. And then I will have exactly the same, but it will be a clickable hyperlink instead of a button. So I concatenate the static part of my URL, pre-fill the task with the field name, and I concatenate a hide task. Yeah, and I add this, and I use add asset as the title for my link. So in this way, yeah, you can construct a dynamic URL passing as much arguments as you want to. Yeah, a very sorry. Yeah, very good question. Anyone with URL can modify the field. Can you protect this? No. So you send them the URL, and if they start modifying the query string, yeah, actually they can add a file to a new task. But if the task doesn't exist, it will not link to a task because it simply doesn't exist. Yeah, but is it 100% proof? No. If someone starts modifying the query string, well, yeah, then they can modify it. And that's why picking a unique name for each task, like I did over here, well, I prefer this over having just a row ID, because if you just pass a row ID, it's very tempting to play with the query string. And if you see row ID number, I say 532, and you say, oh, what happened if I replace 532 with 637? Yeah, it's less likely if you have a certain code for a task. But yeah, not 100% idiot proof. Or maybe idiot proof is not the word, it's abusive proof. So let's have a look at the following use case, which is capacity planning. And actually, I split this into two. So I have a number of tasks and I added the number of team members to perform those tasks. And now I want to know the workload for each team member. And yeah, there are several ways to do this. So without formulas, those are my tasks. Those are the assignees. This is the status of a task. It's not started, it's complete, it's in progress. This is the deadline. This is the expected workload. Without formulas, so the tasks are linked to my team members, I would say I'm going to add a rollup field. And rollup fields are actually nothing more or less than predefined formulas, where I say, okay, pick my task, pick the estimated workload, and I want to perform the sum function on it. I'm going to create this, and it shows, okay, that Ali has 12 hours of work. Yeah, this matches my formula. Bran, 34 hours, matches my formula, but it doesn't match for Cindy, which has 136 hours versus 54 hours. So what my rollup field does is looking at all the tasks and just picking the estimated workload and make the sum, which actually can be done with a formula. So if you don't like rollup fields, don't use the rollup fields. So lookup tasks, my estimated workload. Estimated workload is not written correctly. Expected workload, my apologies. Okay, so this serves as a lookup field, but if I want it to be a rollup field, well, just make the sum. Sum is also a function. So I have the same result, but done with a plain formula instead of a rollup field. If I want to have the average, AVG instead of sum, and it calculates the average workload. Okay, but why is the rollup field not detailed enough? Well, the rollup field picks all the tasks and has all the workload, but I want to know the open workload. So I use the filter function. So again, I say, okay, look up tasks, expected workload, but filter on the following criteria where lookup task status, my status field, doesn't have the value completed, and only filter those tasks. So if I perform this function, it only shows the workload for tasks that are still open, which is for the first two, they only have one task that is open, so it's the same. But as you see for Cinda, it was different because she only has two open tasks. But I don't want to see the workload separately. I want to make the sum, and this shows me that Cinda has 54 hours to go. Instead of, if I had a rollup field, it was 136 hours. So this allows you to fine tune a little bit more and to see in real time the open workload that each staff member still has, using the filter function that filters their tasks based on the status. And for the final use case, we're going to take this one more step further and do it on a weekly basis, because I saw for Cinda, she had 136 hours workload open. No way that she can perform all those tasks in a week, but maybe she has nothing to do this week and the 136 hours are scheduled for tasks within 2 months or spread over 4 or 5 months. So I want to have more details. Namely, I want to see what's the workload for this week and what's the workload for next week. And I'm going to use the datetime format function here. So database number 10, I added a formula field showing my week over here. So I have the week number. If you think this is a major calculation, well, small trick in Baserow, you can use all the date format arguments that are available in Postgres. So datetime format, pick my deadline field, IW, don't know sure what it's short for. I think ISO standardized week number, and this shows my week number. So if you want to use this trick for a lot of other things, let's add a formula field and say, okay, datetime format, my deadline field, and I want to see the name of the day just by using day. Shows Friday, Wednesday, Saturday, and so on. I want to see the name of the month. Well, very simple, use month, and it shows March or April. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, using this one. So the IW, I got my week number. And in my team members, I extended my filter a little bit. This is the open workload that we had from the previous demo. And this is the workload for this week. So this is from the previous one, but I extended my condition where I said, okay, convert to a number, being my week number, and compare it with the week number in the task table. If it's the same, then it belongs to this week, otherwise it doesn't. So this shows that 45 of the 54 hours open is for this week. And I used an orange background or a yellow background when the week is higher than 100%. So we see that, yeah, Cinda is a little bit overscheduled for this week, but she's underscheduled for next week. And the formula here is, simply the same, but I add +1 because it's for the next week. Yeah, and to calculate the percentage, I assume they work 40 hours a week, multiply this by 100, and I get the percentage of workload they are having for this week. And round, yeah, I don't want to see any decimals, so I round with 0 decimals. And with the number formatting, I can add the percentage sign, so I don't have to do anything for this. Yeah, so now I see the workload for this week and next week. Okay, so those were the 10 use cases I like to cover during the webinar. Let's go over the questions. Yeah, so the webhook was in use case number 6. Can I use a function to trigger a change in a field that triggers a webhook? So the example function populates the field with near when a date is within 2 days. Yeah. Well, actually, no. So what you can do is for webhooks, let's see, yeah. So I have my table, I can attach a webhook to a table, and I can say, okay, if a record is updated, trigger on the following fields, and I can select the formula field here. So if urgent or is high priority becomes true, then I want to trigger the webhook. But I'm not sure if webhooks are triggered on formula updates. So I would need to perform a check for this. But if they are triggered, this is the way to go. You add a webhook to your table. You say, okay, if a record is updated, you check the formula field that you want to be checked, and then it would trigger your webhook. But I would need to double check if webhooks are actually triggered on formula updates, because when a formula updates, you haven't updated any value. The calculation have been updated. So I hope this answers the question. So let's go to the other questions. Seems like I have missed a couple of them in the questions tab. My apologies for this. So The today function is recalculated, for, I think, every 5 minutes. So besides the today function, we also have the now function. So let's add a formula field over here. So today returns the date of today, and now returns a current timestamp. But for performance reasons, the now function is not recalculated every second. I think it's 5 minutes, 5 or 7 minutes that it's recalculated. If I want to do any character instead of GB, yeah, that's possible. So if I want to modify my formula, so what I'm going to do is say, okay, between A and Z, I want to have exactly 2 characters. Did I make a typo somewhere? No. So if I now say this is AB, that's a valid number. If I say this is ABC, it's no longer a valid number because I have 3 characters. But to be honest, to create regular expressions, there are a couple of websites that are pretty good at it, that offer a lot of documentation for it. So I'm far from an expert in creating regular expressions. So going back to the name field, is there a formula to count the number of names that have HUM? Yeah. Okay. So for the first one, I understand that you say, okay, I want to have HUM number 1, or I have MAN is the first MAN task. This should be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. No, the row ID always continues. So actually what I should do is, from category, I should store it in a separate table, and then I would need to count how many times a category has appeared and add 1 to that number. So it's not completely undoable, but it will be rather complex and maybe not that performant to have a follow-up number followed by the category. At least you will need to store categories in a separate table and use a count for it. Do you have webhooks on row changed? Yep. So yeah, like I explained, you can add a webhook to a table. If a record is updated, it will trigger the webhook. But if the updated record is a formula field, it will not trigger the webhook because actually you haven't updated the value. The calculation has been updated. Is it possible to filter by formula fields containing rollup with filter functions? I'm not sure if I understand the question. So I want to filter a formula field. Yes, that's possible, but only if the formula field itself returns a lookup field. So you cannot use the filter function if the result of the formula field is pure text, date, number, or something like this. So only if your formula field returns a number of items, so like a lookup field, then it's possible to refer to that field for further filtering. Can I freeze the result of a formula with dynamic arguments, for example, copying the result to a static field? Yeah, so that's a question we get pretty often. Like here, it's really great to predict the desired start date, but if I run this tomorrow, my desired start date will be updated again. So the only option here is if you say, okay, I want to have an actual start date, which is a date field. And let's say, okay, this task, we started it today, so I copy it. This one started today, and let's also start this one today. This field will still be the same tomorrow. This field will be updated tomorrow. Or yeah, you can solve it like I did here in use case number 6. If I say, okay, the task has started, I trigger an automation and I fill in the start date with an automation. Okay, we have reached the hour. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you for attending this webinar. So like I mentioned before, you can install the template from baserow.io/templates and go through all the formulas again. So yeah, thank you for attending and hope to see you next time for another webinar.